also telling everyone that all presentations will be recorded and afterwards will be published on YouTube. And also thanking Statistics Flanders for putting together this fantastic one-day conference and allowing us to be here and share all these presentations. So we have drop out because our second presenter, due to health issues, is not going to be able to do his presentation. And this means that there's going to be 3 presentations. Well, the good news is that maybe we can talk and discuss a little bit more about those 3 presentations. We're going to maintain the order originally set. And then let me start with Haritz Olaeta from the Basque Institute of Statistics, who's going to talk about the working group of regional institutes for the production of regional SDG indicators in Spain. Haritz has a degree in economics, mathematical economics, in the University of the Basque Country, and then a master's and a PhD degree in statistics in the University of Bristol in the UK. He has more than 20 years of experience in official statistics in different fields. In EUSTAT, which is the statistical office of the Basque Country. And then as a methodologist, he worked in a small area estimation modeling and seasonal adjustment. Then he moved to quarterly national accounts. And for the last few years, he coordinates the short-term business statistics at EUSTAT and the SDG statistical indicator system for the Basque Country in coordination with most of the regional statistical offices in Spain. So in Spain, we've been working on this project to coordinate the elaboration of these SDG indicators, and they were the coordinators, and it's very nice that they're here to tell us a bit about the project. So Haritz, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Javier. First of all, thank you very much to the Flemish Institute for inviting us here. And I was a bit ashamed when I heard that I took my PhD in England in statistics. I think I learned a bit of statistics, but my English is horrible, so I didn't learn any English at all. Sorry. I hope you understand me. Right, I'm going to talk about this working group of regional institutes in Spain that we're producing a regional sustainable development goal indicators at regional level, right? Well, I want to apologize on behalf of my colleague, Maria Victoria Garcia Olea. She's the coordinator of the group. Actually, I participate in the group, but I'm not the coordinator. She's probably the right person to show you how we are working, what we've got so far. But her agenda is quite horrible, and I hope I'll try to do my best. So in any case, this is a really cooperative work between all or most of the regional statistical institutes in Spain, and even the National Statistics Institute, INE, has a very important role, because it's one of the successes that we are coordinated quite well for once. And this is a project really down-to-earth project with real results. And I'll try to show what we've doing till now and which are our results so far. Right, first, a few words about the Spanish statistical system, which obviously is very complex as well. Then I'll show you the timeline of the SDG indicator construction in Spain. And then I'll describe a bit the regional working group with the participants, how they work, and so on. And I'll show you some results and the following steps. Here a picture is not complete, but about the statistical system in Spain. Spain, as you might know, is a highly decentralized country with 17 autonomous communities and even 2 autonomous cities. Then below the regions, we've got provinces, and but I'm going to stay always in these 2 top lines. Talking about the Spanish at country level, sorry, and at autonomous community or regional level. At country level, we've got mainly the INE, the Instituto Nacional de Estadística, but then all the ministries have their statistics unit, and the Bank of Spain as well has a vital role and produces official statistics. Then at regional level, we've got 17 statistical offices, and they are like the regions. As the region, they are different in size and even in legal nature. They all have their own statistical law and with yearly statistical programs and plans, but they are very different in nature and how they work. We are very heterogeneous statistical offices with different sizes, and most of the offices actually have a framework or general agreements with the central statistical office with INE, and they use the microdata to produce statistics for the regions, with or without extra samples. But then there is another approach to regional statistics, is the one we follow in EUSTAT, which is the Basque Statistical Office. And the thing is that we don't have general agreements with INE. We produce our own statistics. This is good news for us, but then it's not good news for our respondents, because there is a lot of duplication of statistics, which we should definitely be ashamed of. Right. Well, there are some coordination units that works at both levels, horizontally between the autonomous communities, and then vertically with INE, the ministries, and the Bank of Spain. Right. All this started with adoption of the General Assembly of the United Nations of the Global Indicator Framework for Sustainable Development Goals. That was actually INE included in their statistics program for 2018, statistical operation called Indicators for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. During that year, in 2018, most of the regional offices actually included in their own statistics programs similar operations. Then, after a meeting with INE and some of the ministries and some of the regional statistical offices, we launched a working group, which is the CITE group. It's the one in yellow. And the idea here was, the main purpose of this group was to share the methodology followed by the National Statistical Institute in their Spanish SDG indicators platform, which was launched in 2019. Thing is that the indicators, the platform was launched with over 100 national indicators with no regionalization at the beginning. The thing is that the methodology was not clear. So we wanted to make sure that we understood how it was measured, all the indicators, and know the methodology. So the aim of this working group, that includes INE, ministries, and some of the regional offices, was to be able to replicate the indicators. I mean, we're a bit obsessed with being able to replicate data, because we want to be comparable, and we want to have a clear methodology, and we want to adapt, all of us, the same methodology in order to be directly comparable. Or this is just an example. I mean, the indicators, but it should be the same for all the statistics, I think. The work in this CITE group, or this interinstitutional group, is really important for us because it's the output that we'll be using in our regional working group. That's the one that I'm going to be talking about today. We want to be able to replicate the indicators at national level, and then we want to make the exercise to regionalize them, but not from the INE approach, but from our approach, from the regional approach. So from this coordinated work done in this CITE group, in 2019, in June, we formed the regional statistical offices working group that whose aim is to regionalize national indicators. All right. First results were at the end of 2020 with over 100 regional indicators totally harmonized in the methodology. And then last year we published another like 60 more indicators and nowadays we've got like 160 or 170, I think, indicators at regional level in Spain that covers most of the SDGs with a completely harmonized methodology. Right. So the working group is formed by 15 out of the 17 autonomous communities in Spain. So we are a lot of people. We're over 30 people there. The working strategy from the very beginning has been based on a full cooperation. No one stands up. No matter the size of the organization or the approach of producing statistics, we all work together and we are all equal. This was the first time actually that was formed such a big group with all the communities and with such a down-to-earth aim. And actually that should last for years and we should be producing constantly indicators. So I think the coordinators were a bit afraid at the beginning. So it was very important from the very beginning to start organizing the work and trying to coordinate what different people should do and without being just a single group, but having like different subgroups in it. So there is a coordination unit on top. We are in the coordination unit, and Cantabria is another autonomous community is there. Then we've got 4 different working groups, which are we consider the regions that belong to each of the groups, and these 4 independent groups are allocated a set of indicators at national level, and they are the ones that do the thinking about if it's correct or not and how to calculate those indicators. Each of the groups actually was trying to represent the whole of Spain. So we wanted to be in each of the groups like a very small region, a biggest region, and a medium-sized region, right? Because from the very beginning, we were aware of sampling problems in some of the regions, because we've got like very big regions, but very small ones as well. So sample sizes was one important thing for us from the beginning. Then there are 3 more groups, more horizontal groups: the methodology unit, data request unit, and the dissemination unit. Methodology unit is we belong to that unit as well. Catalonia does as well. We try to answer questions that might arise about the methods used, about the sources, and so on. Then there is the data request unit, which is the one that asks informally but centralized, and for using the same bridges, communication bridges with the ministries or even with INE. They request all the data, all the microdata we need to produce our indicators. And there's the dissemination unit that's responsible for having for disseminating the to set a plan of regional indicators and how to publish them. So it seems quite complex. There are many groups, but the good thing is that all the decisions, in any case, are taken by all of us in a plenary session. So we all feel in the first line when deciding things. Right. So this is the process that I want to describe here, the process that from one national indicator, how we end up with a regional indicator. Right. In light blue, the tasks for the working groups. In green, task, there's no green here, it's gray. The data request unit. In pink, the methodology unit. And in yellow, the dissemination unit. These are the tasks. This is the flow that one indicator follows. So the working group starts on top with an initial assessment of possible regionalization of a single indicator. In some cases, it's clear that an indicator cannot be regionalized due to different reasons, like doesn't make any sense at regional level, or there is no enough sample, or there is it doesn't make any sense, and so on. There are different reasons. Then it can happen as well that we know how to calculate, but we don't have data, so we need to ask to the data request unit to centralize the information. Or we can have some methodological problems that we need to propose to the methodology unit. That's the one that proposes an answer to any methodological issue that might arise in this initial assessment of the indicator. Once, or in other cases, sorry, there is data and it's clear how to regionalize the indicator. So it's directly the first task that the working group needs to make is a methodology note, a production methodology note. We'll see one afterwards. The thing is that in this methodology note, it has to be clear all the steps followed to construct the regional indicator. We need as much as detail as possible, and the aim is to be able to replicate that indicator at any time by any person. Next step, in addition to this methodology note, we need to calculate the series, and then we need to analyze the series from a time series approach and see whether it's too variable, if there are inconsistencies between regions. So there is a work there that the methodology unit needs to, is centralized in the methodology unit and studies carefully this methodology node and this series for the regions that belong to the group, to the working group. Then there is a testing process. We all participate in that. We read the methodology, a single methodology node. We calculate the indicator for our region. We introduce the series in this file, and then it goes again to the methodology unit. In this process as well, when we all are testing the indicator, usually minor changes to the methodology node are proposed, sometimes even bigger errors or major problems. But in general, it's very enriching, this phase. So then the working group writes down a definite production methodology node. That is, again, we'll see now, is very detailed. And then once that is approved by the methodology unit, then the dissemination unit translates the information in the production methodology node into a more readable and more easy to read and more less detailed methodology node. Okay. In any way, we see that the plenary session is we are all the 15 15 regions there, and at the end of the day, we all approve or discard a single indicator. Right, so it's quite complex. There are many units, different people involved, different groups. It takes time from one phase to another phase. So one of the things that we saw at the beginning was that we wanted to be like sending 100 emails a day, or so we defined a SharePoint directory, and all the communication is there. There is a secretary in each of the groups, and if I got a question to do to one unit or one working group, I just write to the secretary of the group. I don't email everyone and so on. So the thing is, we are many people, but I think it was quite well organized, and it seems that it works quite well. Right. So possible outcomes for all these flows of that follows the indicator from a proposed indicator are 4. We can get a direct indicator. Direct indicator means we can get it directly from the national indicator, both because it makes sense and because there is data available. So it's direct indicator. Then another option or another possible outcome is an indirect indicator. Here we do have a national level indicator, but then regionally we can't replicate that indicator. And this can happen because of there are some methodology differences, or because the data source we use is an alternative one, right? But in any case, we try to benchmark to the national one. Then in the process of thinking, considering the concept of a single indicator, we end up with an alternative indicator. We say, well, this indicator is in the national platform, but it doesn't make sense. We consider it doesn't inform about the global SDG, or sometimes we think that there is a better indicator, so we propose an alternative one. Even when we have a regional alternative indicator, we calculate it for the total of Spain, because most of the offices publish their series compared to the Spanish one, to the national one, and the national indicator will be the same when the indicator is direct or indirect, but not when it's alternative. And in other cases, maybe half of the cases, the indicator is discarded for different reasons. Right, this is a production methodology note. This is just an example. The aim, as I said before, is to be able to replicate the obtained service at any moment and by anyone. This one is in Spanish, sorry, because it's just for internal use of the offices. But well, it's about the adolescent birth rate per 1,000 women in the age group of 15 to 19 years. So first entry is the name of the indicator with 4 or 5 digits. It's internal code. The name is very important. The name we choose is not trivial. We want to be short. We want to be correct. We want to be explicative. We want to be coherent. We want the thing is that we want, even though we are 15 institutions working together, we want the final product to be like really homogeneous. So we need some rules for how to name the indicators even. And actually, in the second round, we got the name of the indicator, the global indicator at 3 digits, and many times, I don't know if maybe it's because of the Spanish translation, but the wording is not correct, and we're not very happy with that. But we decided not to change the 3 digit, the global SDG indicator. And then there is the goal, and what else? In the objective of the indicator. That's no, sorry, the definition. So we are Let's see if I can manage with this. I can't. Yeah, here. So this is the United Nations coding. We start here with the definition. The definition is really important as well. We want a definition that is correct, explicative, and we want there to be all like a small summary of what is included in the indicator. Right. Then we've got the formula, which is very detailed. This is something that the group from the very beginning had a high interest. One of the problems, well, the main problem we faced at the beginning was that there was no methodology note in the National Institute in the platform of the indicators. We didn't know how to calculate them. We could have an idea, but then we didn't actually know. So we wanted a formula. We wanted the source. We wanted to be like really as precise as possible. So we want clear formula with all the necessary details. In this case, for instance, we give instructions about the microdata that we are using. We have references to a particular variable, and we have all the information included there. And this follows. Then we got difference. The first entry here is the difference with the national indicator. We explain there all the differences and so on. And there are like some other entries, including the observations ones. Is the last entry here is empty. There was not any observation here to do, but it's very important as we need all the information. Like if we are sharing maybe programs to replicate the indicators, we say here in the observations in the file, there is the SAS program and the access file or whatever, right? So this is one important thing, I think, the methodology note. And this was accompanied, or is accompanied for each of the indicators. This is the same indicator with this Excel file where the series are calculated for that indicator. We started always from 2010, whenever it's possible, and the reference year we take is the 2015. All right. In the first row, it says INE. It shouldn't say INE. It should say Spain. Okay. This is the value of the series of the indicator at national level. That sometimes is the same as the one that has INE in their platform. But when the indicator is not direct or indirect, this is different, right? And the figure on the right is one of the tools that is used by the methodology unit to analyze the variability of the indicator at regional level and see if there are inconsistencies and if the variability is big enough or is too much. Or this is one of the tools that we use to discard or to accept an indicator. There is more information in this sheet, like the sample size of the source when a statistics used, with a sample statistics used, and so on. Sorry. Okay. So this is this file is filled up by all the others when the testing process starts. So all the rest of the autonomous communities, they calculate following as I said, following the instructions in the methodology note, the series from the starting at 2010, and then we have here like several graphs, and I mean, like in half of the cases, the indicator actually has been discarded because the variability or inconsistencies between communities and so on. So this is the testing process. Once we've got accepted an indicator, we produce a dissemination methodology note, which is this one, which is like more tidy and it's explicative enough with the formula, with the unit of measure, information sources, periodicity, and everything. But the formula, it doesn't make, we don't include files, we don't include names of contact persons or anything. It's just the formula itself, right? So Achievements. This one dissemination node for us is like the most important thing that we've got in this process, because we've got almost 200 such nodes harmonized by all of the regions, and it's calculated for all the regions by all the regions, right? So for us, this is like really important. It's a real triumph for us to have this such a dissemination methodology node. I'll go a bit faster now. So so far in the dissemination phase of this indicator, this SDG indicator platforms at a regional level, we've got 160 indicators fully harmonized. We've got some minimum common contents for dissemination. We do disseminate only our own series, and in many cases compared to the Spanish one, but we don't have a common dissemination yet. We are working on that one. One important thing, we use our own data sources as well whenever we have. We at EUSTAT, we are quite productive regional institute, so we do have our own statistics in many cases, not always, but whenever we have our own statistics, we use our data, and that's another triumph, I think, of the. I mean, we harmonize the methodology, not the sources, right? As I said, we always accompany our data with the national estimate. Now we are working in a phase 2 of the dissemination, of a common dissemination process. We have a SDMX file for data exchange between offices from the end of last year. And every region can disseminate data for all the rest of the 14 autonomous communities that is included in that SDMX file. So far, we haven't started yet. We, EUSTAT, are about to, in a couple of months, we're changing our platform of indicators, and our aim is to disseminate data from all the regions in Spain and the total of the country. There are many challenges like synchronization, the update I mean, each region has their own rhythm. I mean, we don't have same resources. Some of the institutes want to update the data whenever the sources are ready, but in other ones, the thing is that they can just do it once or twice a year. So that's a challenge for us. What we're working now is in the we keep working in more and more indicators. We want to translate this SDMX file and place it in open data. That's one of the directions that we are working now. And the final goal probably is to get an integrated common dissemination. This is quite complicated because the thing is that we don't have a legal unit that can cope with common dissemination. But as I said, some institutes at least have the aim of publishing and disseminating data from all the rest of the regions, not only their own one. So this is a working group that still is working, probably for the next few years. And the thing is that we are quite happy because it's been very well coordinated, and we head into almost 200 indicators at regional level, which are fully comparable with a harmonized methodology, and that is transparent because it's on the web. And I invite you all to enter in our webpage. We are now changing the platform. In a couple of months, we're going to open SDA's kind of visualization of indicators, but still we do have many indicators and fully comparable. So thanks a lot.
If there is any question, we have some time. Robin?
Thanks. Yeah, I just had one question, really. I think it's really great. I mean, it looks like a great effort and lots of work to get to that point of actually producing regional indicators. But I just had a question around, so I think I heard you say there's no involvement of the Spanish National Institute at all. So they don't take part in the discussions or the working groups, but I assume that they publish national level indicators for the SDGs, but they don't do anything at the regional level.
Yeah, there is one group, is another group, is not our group, is the one that I said that is the National Institute is included, and some of the representatives of the regional institutes are in that group. And the thing we want, I mean, the aim of that group is to replicate national data. And actually the INE is cooperating a lot, and it's been really transparent with us. And I mean, this project couldn't ever get results if the National Institute couldn't, or at least the speed would be much lower. I mean, the National Institute is cooperating a lot in this case. And then we do have different indicators. I mean, and they are working in the platform as well. They are regionalizing their indicators. And the thing is that we should integrate everything. I mean, in the process, even INE has gained a lot because we discussed with them a lot for most of the indicators individually, like, well, we should maybe take this population with, you know, it's been very, very, very enriching for INE as well. And actually they are sort of copying our formulas in the methodology notes. And because when they launched the platform, I guess most of the countries were like pushed by their government to publish something. And it was like many indicators, over 100 indicators, but no methodology explained at all. And maybe there were targets or goals that were very well informed, but there were goals that not informed at all. I mean, it's just a starting point. And then everything goes improving. And I think INE realized from the very beginning that we were very much help for them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so let me remind you that we are being a bit more generous with the time, but that we can afford it because there is one person who is not able to speak for health issues. And now let's move to the second presentation, which will be by Isabelle Erauw from the Education and Training Department. She's going to talk about the process to get the international statistics about education. Isabelle is a policy advisor in the Strategic Policy Support Division within the Flemish Education and Training Department, and she works, among others, in the field of internationally comparable education indicators, and is from that perspective involved in the cooperation with international institutions such as EUSTAT, OECD, and UNESCO. Isabelle, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's very good to have some real-life audience in front of me again. As much as I appreciate the online participation, I'm very happy that you're here this afternoon to listen to me. When our colleagues from Statistics Flanders invited us to be part of this event on regional statistics, I have to say that we were very easily convinced. Why? As an education ministry, we have a wealth of administrative data in our own house. We also have at least the ambition, and I hope that we're also living that idea, of supporting our policymakers with data. So using our data for our education minister and his decisions. And we are, of course, a so-called subnational entity. So I think that we check all the boxes to have some interesting insights for you today. What have I brought? I'm going to start with a very concise introduction to education in Flanders. Don't worry, I will not try to explain the Belgian federal state structure, but I do need to put one element on the table for you just in order to understand the rest of the presentation and to see where I'm coming from. I will then, of course, try to explain to you why we attach such value to making our own regional education statistics and integrating them in the international comparisons. And of course, I will also try to give you some view in our day-to-day work. How do we go about that? What aspects of that work challenge us? And what kind of opportunities does it bring? And I wouldn't leave you without an opportunity to ask me anything about education statistics, of course. So as already explained briefly, I worked for the education ministry of the Flemish community here in Brussels. And I coordinate all the activities on international data collection, statistics, indicators, and so on, which is, I guess, the main reason why I'm the one here today in front of you. I also coordinate our participation in some large-scale sample surveys, mainly assessment of student outcomes. So that also touches on what we are discussing here today. I promised just one bit on education in Flanders. 99%, almost everything on education, legislation, structure, and so on, has been under the authority of the communities in Belgium since the early 80s, so more or less 40 years ago. In practice, it means that our Flemish Minister for Education, he governs all the schools in the Flemish region, so the northern part of the country. And we also govern all the schools in Brussels, where the language of instruction is Dutch. We share that Brussels capital region with our colleagues from the Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, who govern all the schools where French is the language of instruction. And you see that I have also mentioned our colleagues from the German-speaking community in the east of the country, meaning that we have three completely separate education systems in Belgium. They have been slowly diverging for 40 years now. I say slowly, you probably know that education systems are not the quickest to change, but of course 40 years is a long time. And you will see that even though still quite some basic elements are the same among those education systems, they do diverge, and they now actually do have very clear differences as well between the systems. I think that's the most important structural information I needed to give you before continuing. So now I can try to tell you why we think it is so important to work on regional statistics on education. I said that education belongs to the communities, and communities are not just territorial entities. It's not that it's just a question of borders of geographical entities. They also live in a different reality when it comes to education, because education policy is different. It means that for the public, their experience with the education system is a Flemish experience and not a Belgian experience. So we do think that it is important for the public to have information in the form of data, statistics, indicators, and so on the Flemish situation. And we also think that it's important for them to be able to place that Flemish education system within an international comparison. So at least they have some idea on how our education system is actually doing in an international perspective. Of course, it's also very relevant to policy. I mean, that's also my main job from day to day, is to try and assist our policymakers. We try to use the data that we have as much as possible for policy evaluation, policy preparation, and so on. Numerous exercises are done. And I'm going to concentrate on two important types of data. I do want to say that I have left out the qualitative data elements. We also use them. Some of you might know of the Eurydice network of the European Commission. They use, let's say, 85% qualitative data elements. We are also part of that network, and we do cooperate. But I have left this presentation to the data that you can, let's say, easily sum up to the Belgian level, because, of course, that's the idea here, that in practice you can have a Belgian level, and under that Belgian level you have the communities. That leaves me with two types of data. And the first type are the administrative data that we collect mainly from our schools, through our schools, and that we have in our own ministry available from day to day, and that we use for some international data collections. The most, I think, best known one is the so-called UOE data collection, which actually stands for UNESCO, OECD, and EUSTAT. So those are the large international administrative data collections on things like students, schools, teachers, things like that. And then, of course, we also have a lot of data that are based on surveys, typically sample surveys. Going to tell you a bit more about those two types of data. When I look at the administrative data, we actually have no choice but to cooperate from the regional level to reach the national level. I mean, there is no way around it in a country like Belgium, because there is no such thing as a Belgian education ministry. There is no place in the state structure anymore for education on the Belgian federal level. So you have to talk to the three communities if you want to know something about administrative data on education. There is no pool on the Belgian level. So the cooperation on the administrative data is just a necessity for the international organizations, but also, of course, for us. When we look at the sample surveys, cooperation is, let's say, highly desirable from our point of view, because, of course, the situation here is different. It is perfectly possible to have a very nice Belgian sample, but end up with data sets that cannot be used at regional level. Perfectly possible. That is why we try our best. And for the first subcategory of the international assessments on education, this actually is in the realm of our own minister. So this is something that from the community level we are directly involved in and decide on things like participation. And in that perspective, we act as if we were a country. So you have to interpret this as when we decide to participate in one of these large-scale programs, we try to follow all guidelines as another country would do. We are not necessarily obliged to do so. We can choose to participate as Belgium, and then we just have to follow the guidelines on the level of Belgium. And a very easy example is sample size. It would be possible for us to work with a Belgian sample size. But of course, then we have a data quality issue at the end of the process. Because let's say, roughly speaking, 60% of that Belgian sample would be Flemish. But of course, my data set resulting from a very huge investment, I have to say. These are very expensive and burdensome research projects, actually. I would end up with a data set that would not allow me to actually make all the indicators that an international report presents. And that is basically what we want to achieve in the end. We want our data to have the quality, the same quality and full comparability to the data of the other countries. Then, of course, you have a lot of sample surveys where our colleagues of StatBel, the Belgian Statistical Institute, have the responsibility. I think that almost all of them also have a link, of course, to EUSTAT. There we are not in the driving seat at all, but we do try to remain involved in what happens with those surveys, because we do use the outcomes, of course. So we try to get involved in things like the questionnaire items on education, so that we are very much aware of how the questionnaire works, what the advantages and disadvantages are, also methodologically, sample sizes, things like that, that we are very much aware of what we can do with these data and what we cannot do with the data, because sometimes data are misinterpreted and misused because you just lack some of the knowledge of the methodology behind it. So we have very good contacts with our colleagues at StatBel, who are governing this kind of survey for the whole of Belgium, of course. Now, how do we work from day to day? We are actually quite a small team when you look at the international statistics. I think that we have like 3 to 4 people who have a good share of their tasks on the point of international statistics. We do, of course, have more people who are on the overall administrative data. And we can use their expertise, of course, when we have an international question. How do we try to achieve the international comparison for our regional indicators? We try to get fully involved in the international dialogue, which is not always an easy thing from a regional perspective. But I have to say that from the Belgian situation, it is easier to defend because we can actually say that education belongs to the community level. When you don't have that argument, it's much harder to do so. But we try to literally be around the table when there are discussions on education statistics. I'm thinking about EUSTAT working groups, task forces. I'm thinking about the INES project of the OECD. You might know Education at a Glance, which is the flagship from the INES project on education indicators. So we try to be there when things are discussed. We also try not to hide behind our status of subnational entity, and we try to build the same expertise as a national institute or a national statistics team would do. And we try to respect all definitions, implementation guidelines, response rates when it comes to surveys and so on, at the same level as a country would do. And it's a bit what I just said before. It's not always an easy thing to do. It's quite burdensome, and we are not strictly obliged to do so. But in the interest of data quality and in the interest of being able to use your data afterwards in the way that you would like to use them, we do put a lot of effort in this. And the very, very last step is to make the sum of the communities, of course, because in the international world of the statistics, we are, of course, required to, in the end, submit Belgian data. We don't, we can never, of course, submit only regional data. Eurostat does accept regional data and uses some regional data, but the end exercise of every data collection cycle is summing up to the Belgian level. But that's really the very last step in our process. So we try to make sure that the quality is there in all the underlying phases of that data collection. It's a fascinating job, but it has its challenges, as everything, I guess. Interpreting the sum is not always easy when you know that the underlying parts are actually not summed up as naturally as some people might think. I'll try to make myself clear. When we see a Belgian result, it's not always easy for us to explain what that actually says, if it says anything at all in some cases. Because what you do is you add up two different units that are not made up in the same way. I'm going to give you an easy example. A few years ago, well, probably already 5-6 years ago by now, we introduced an associate level degree in our education system in the Flemish community. For those who speak Dutch, HBO 5 of het hoger beroepsonderwijs. That was a level that at that point in time did not exist in the other regions, in the other communities. Of course, when you make a sum on the Belgian level, you see it as if it's something that exists in Belgium, while half the country doesn't have that system. It's a very practical example of how you can, from the outside, easily misinterpret a Belgian statistic on education. And it's not always easy for us to correct that kind of interpretation when the results are published. Probably a very Belgian problem is region versus community. I've spent probably 95% of my time talking about community because education is community authority. But you also have a lot of data sources that work with the region. When I talk about the LFS, you get regional results, not community results. So we always have to be very careful to see what we are actually using and how we explain to people that we cannot put all the results on the level where we actually need them, which for us would be the community. But it's something that is once again challenging our everyday process and is challenging us to make sure that it's always very clear with a dozen of footnotes under every table what we are actually presenting. Another challenge is, of course, that we share the responsibility for quality data on the Belgian level with the other communities, and we share it at an equal basis. I mean, there is no authority amongst the communities, of course not, because we are equal. But of course, that means that your coordination is, let's say, on almost voluntary basis, in the sense that you have to make sure that your end result is stable, timely, qualitative, and so on, without an authority to actually structure that process very well. Another challenge is, as I said, we have had 40 years of diverging systems. Some fundamental principles are still the same, and I guess from the outside, the systems still look very, very similar. But once you get into the data, then you will actually see that there are small differences, and they are becoming larger and larger over the years, that are challenging us with our Belgian statistics, the interpretation, once again, of the Belgian results, and are also challenging us to systematically provide the regional or the community alternative to certain indicators. Because of course, once we got a large publication on education indicators on the international level, then the question is immediate, yes, but is this also something that is valid for the Flemish situation? And as I just said, it's not always feasible for us to replicate everything. We simply don't have the human capacity to replicate everything, so we do have to make some choices on the indicators or the statistics that are most valuable to us. But of course, everything that is available on the Belgian level can eventually lead to a question on the Flemish results. But this work also has a lot of opportunities for us. Being part of an international community is always a very interesting experience. We try to make this a two-way street. We try to be there and have all the information firsthand, but we also try to be there with our own point of view, meaning we try to be as active as we can be on those fora with our own perspective. And in some cases, it's probably a perspective typically for a region. In other cases, it's probably not for the region, but just a Flemish or even a Belgian perspective. So we try to be an integral part of that community. And it's very much linked to the second opportunity that we get to learn from the best all over the world, basically. In a small country, and not even a small country, a small region, it's not always easy to have all expertise readily available. And it's simply, I guess, not the case for us. So we do get a lot of ideas, leads, and so on from our international dialogue. So we try to take advantage of that as much as we can, not just from the literal international conversation that we have, but also all the contacts that you get from those groups, and to see what other countries are doing. I think that we've had a lot of inspiration from dashboards from other countries lately that we are envious of course, and we'll try to make something along those lines. We also think that it's important to get regions to be more visible in this whole exercise, because a lot of countries are working actually with regional statistics, but most of those regional statistics are not that visible. You have to really know that they are there somewhere, and you have to go and look for them. So we do try to concentrate at least parts of what we do on making it all a bit more visible, and trying to, let's say, make some international publications with the level of our community statistics, which is not always an easy thing. And I can understand for practical reasons that it's not always easy to get that kind of detail in publications, websites, and so on, because it's not that user-friendly always to do so. But I do believe that this is very relevant information also for other countries, not just for us. It's not just about being there, but I think that other countries can actually take the data for an education system instead of a country. And of course, the last one is, for me, I guess, as a civil servant, the most important one. We have a broader knowledge base for our policy making than we would have without all these statistics, because now we can actually compare ourselves on a lot of statistics and indicators with a lot of other education systems. And we no longer just have to look in the mirror. I mean, you can always make trend series and so on your own education system. But I think that in most cases, we try to, at least for our neighboring education systems, make a very solid comparison to what is happening in Flanders and what's happening abroad. And I think that is my presentation for you today. So please shoot.
Okay, thank you, Isabelle. We have some time for burning questions. There are 2 questions.
Thanks. Thanks, Isabelle. Very interesting. So as you know, like in Flanders, since 5 years, we have the decentralization of the official statistics function within Belgium, which came to the Flemish Statistics Authority. And as you know, the legislation at the Flemish level also specifies that we have to follow the code of practice from the EUSTAT European Union in terms of quality, in terms of professional independence, and so on. I just wondered about those principles of the code of practice. Do you take them into account in your work in terms of reporting internationally? Because, like, obviously, those principles, they don't just come from EUSTAT, they also come from the UN. Also, the OECD Council expects the work to be done professionally independent to high quality standards and so on. So could you just comment a bit on how you use those standards in your work within the department?
Well, we of course take them into account. As you just said, they also come from all the international organizations. I mean, they are an inherent part of all their operations when it comes to data collection. Of course, sometimes there are, let's say, conflicts because it's not always easy to make sure that embargoes, for instance, get respected. Sometimes we do have problems, but it's not so much with the administrative data. It's more with the sample data that are actually quite, that can have really sensitive results and that are under international embargoes from the international organizations. And then, of course, you do have some conflicting issues. But I think that in most cases, we don't really have a lot of issues with those standards. And they're already, like EUSTAT is already implementing those same standards. So we are automatically respecting them when respecting the guidelines of EUSTAT and OECD and the UN. So
okay,
yes.
all right, thanks.
Thank you, Isabelle, for the presentation. I have a small question about organization of your sum up. You say we need to sum up our results. Do you have a kind of coordination groups or meetings with the regions? As our previous speakers say, they have working groups. Do you have the same thing in Belgium for sum up? I understand regional data are important and you want to be in front of, well, your voice should be heard in the international organization, but in the end you have to sum up, as you say. Do you have a kind of coordination inside the country? Thank you.
I think that our form of coordination is much more informal. It's not that we have some kind of fixed meeting that would, like, every 6 months would have some kind of meeting. So of course we do have coordination, but it's on a quite informal basis, I have to say. So the way that it's presented is actually the way that it really works in practice, because we do a lot of work first on our own regional level. And you have to know that in the international context, everything is very, very regulated. So we are working in very strict templates with very strict guidelines. So there is not really that much room. There is no wiggle room in that sense. So the questions where we would really need to coordinate on from a content perspective are very limited. And those discussions are actually more on the international level than on the Belgian level, I have to say. Most of the discussions on how do we interpret definitions, how do we implement this, are on the international table more than on the Belgian table. I think that we try to get to some kind of an agreement internationally, and then we implement it within Belgium. So that actually does not leave that many issues to be decided between the communities. It is a practical, informal coordination that we have to get to the Belgian result.
I had a question in the same line, but I just want to continue. If it's on an informal basis, so it's like a gentleman's agreement. I almost, but someone has to be responsible when you have to transfer the data to the UNESCO, OECD, or Eurostat. Someone has to do it. So is that also something that you say, well, now we have to deliver the data? Who is going to do it this year? Or isn't there any kind of more formal agreement like that to organize that between the regions or the communities?
I think that you're actually referring to one of my challenges, that our coordination is indeed not based on any formal agreement within Belgium. There are, of course, a lot of formal agreements with the international institutions. We have an obligation to have data X, Y, Z on that timing and so on. But between the communities, it is, yes, a gentleman's agreement. I have to say that it works very well. I mean, we have never had any problems that were the result of, let's say, a part of the system not cooperating, because that, of course, is something that could happen if you're working on the basis of a gentleman's agreement, but we've never had that kind of problem. I think we have a very good understanding without too much formalization, actually. Yes.
Okay, if I may, a second question. I'm not quite sure if you're able to follow this morning's presentations.
Sorry, I wasn't here.
Okay. So we had Paul Schreier here from the OECD Chief Statistician. And so one of the points we made in the discussion after my talk, I think, was around, does it actually make sense for regional statistics to be aggregated up to the national level when the policy development sits completely at the regional level? And so Paul mentioned that within the OECD Statistical Policy Commission, there had been some discussion around that as well. And actually the principle that they're starting to look at is actually the way to present data, to disseminate data, should actually reflect the level at which the policy is being made. And so from that perspective, that would be a very strong case to say, maybe even to Eurostat, we're no longer summing up and giving Belgian data. So I just want to get your personal reflection on that.
Well, my personal point of view is, of course, that you have to present the data on the level where the policy is indeed made. That is the most relevant data point. Of course, it is also a very difficult question because Belgium is the member state of the OECD. So we do have an obligation to have Belgian data. And I have to say, this is a very old discussion, of course, within education. And in Belgium, it's very clear. We can make a very strong case because all our education policy is on the community level. That is not the case in all the countries, of course. There are a lot of countries which are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. They have some of their education policy on the level of the regions or even below regions sometimes, but they also have a very strong national educational ministry. And I think that the diversity in countries is actually holding back, because you cannot say, okay, we'll make this or this arrangement for Belgium, the Belgian communities, but we will not make it for, let's say, the German Länder. Then the discussion starts at that point, of course. So that has always been a very difficult topic for us. I think if you would look today at what is available, you would find some elements actually on the level of the communities for Belgium where it is not possible to add up. mathematically add up. You cannot add up system features of your education. So that kind of information you will find on the community level. All other information you will find still on the Belgian level. And in some cases, you will find community level information in, let's say, an annex or below the main table, things like that, yes. But of course, to me, it feels that the most relevant point is indeed where the policy is made. I also think it's not just from a Flemish perspective, it's also from an international perspective that when France wants to use some education data for an international comparison and it compares to Belgium, then I'm still wondering, how do they interpret what Belgium actually means in the case of education? Because underlying, you have 3 systems. So I think also for other countries, it would be much more interesting to actually have community level data. But I think it's still a very, very difficult topic internationally.
Okay, that's the answer I expected. It's still nice to hear.
Okay, thanks, Isabelle. So I think it's time we move to our last presentation by Jean-Maurice Frère, which is nicely connected to the first one because it's going to be also on indicators of sustainable development. Jean-Maurice has worked as an analyst in the Task Force Sustainable Development of the Federal Planning Bureau since 1988. And before, he worked at the Catholic University Louvain for the Research Institute for Work and Society. And he holds 2 master's degrees, sociology and quantitative analysis in the social sciences, a bachelor degree in philosophy, and a post-university degree certificate in international relations. At the FPB, he contributes to the reporting on sustainable development indicators and to the analysis, evaluations, and scenarios of the federal reports on sustainable development, where he primarily focuses on poverty and social inclusion. He has conducted research on the current and prospective evolution of the risk of poverty and social exclusion, on the ecological and socioeconomic impact of the low-carbon transition, and on the monitoring of mental health issues and energy poverty. He's a member of the working group Social Indicators in the VPS Social Security, the working group SILC and Administrative Data for the High Council of Statistics, and the Federal Poverty Network of Civil Servants. He was a Belgian delegate at the Indicators subgroup of the Social Protection Committee, and since 2021 at the Interagency and Expert Groups on Disaster-Related Statistics of the UN Statistical Commission. Jean-Maurice, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this introduction, and thank you all, also Statistics Flanders, Mr. Beerten, for this opportunity to present this teamwork for you. It's a teamwork regarding sustainable development indicators. In my presentation, I will focus on 2 points. First, I will situate the SDGs and the indicators that monitor them and explain how we have cooperated in Belgium to establish these indicators. The second part of my presentation, I will explain the methodology to monitor and to assess our country's progress towards these SDGs, and also explain the actual results of this assessment. For the first part of my presentation, I've chosen this illustration of the institutional context of Belgium and our aim to cooperate regarding sustainable development goals and indicators. You see humans creatively connected in a united but diversified enterprise to meet and also to monitor the sustainable development goals. This is what I will be talking about. But first, let me give you a brief introduction on these SDG. The SDGs, 17 SDGs were adopted unanimously by the United Nations in 2015, and it should be considered as a universal call for action to end poverty, protect our planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The SDGs are detailed into 169 targets. These targets are aspirational and global, which each government setting its own national targets and translating them into planning, policies, and strategies, hereby guided by the global level of ambition, but taking into account national circumstances. The United Nations calls all member states to implement Agenda 2030 within their country and also within supranational policy frameworks, because this can facilitate the effective translation of the SDGs into concrete action. And of course, the United Nations calls all member states to effectively monitor, track progress of the SDGs using indicators. How have we done this in Belgium? I will try to explain this in the next slides. As you know, the Interfederal Statistical Institute was established in 2016, 1 year after the United Nations approved Agenda 2030. And its mission is already explained by Mr. Beerten this morning. It's basically to strengthen the cooperation between the federal and federated entities in the compilation of public statistics. Do I need to say that this is perfectly coherent with the United Nations statistical principle regarding the coordination among statistical agencies within countries? Oh. Yes. Within the Institute, there are different working groups, and one is on indicators for sustainable development goals, which I will refer to here by working group. It has 4 tasks. First one is to coordinate the work between the partners of the working group in the monitoring of the SDGs. Secondly, to formulate proposal on the elaboration of a database and also on the creation of new indicators. Thirdly, to follow developments internationally. And fourthly, to formulate where necessary, additional opinions and international positions on statistical indicators related to the SDGs. The working group has gathered since 2016 3 to 4 times a year, and here you can find all the institutes that sit around this round table during the meetings. You can find all the institutes you already know. Statistics Flanders, our host, Brussels Institute for Statistics and Analysis, the Walloon Institute for Evaluation, Perspective and Statistics, the National Bank, our Belgian Statistical Office, Stadbel, and finally, the Federal Planning Bureau, who chairs the meeting and is also the Secretariat. Let me now turn to some characteristics of the SDGs, the targets, and their indicators. This is important to understand the work we have done. First of all, the SDGs can be followed by 169 targets, of which some focus on a specific result. And here there are 2 possibilities. It can be a quantitative objective for a certain year, for example, in 2030, say reach X% by 2030. Or it can be a desired direction. This indicator should go up, it should go down. Note that some of these objectives are more general, focus on means, and use general expressions like encourage, promote, build, upgrade. And let me give an example which echoes the previous speaker. One target is build and upgrade education facilities that are child disability, gender sensitive, and provide safe, non-violent, inclusive, and effective learning environments for all. It's not easy to monitor this global target with just one figure, of course, in our country. Crucial for our country is, however, that for all regions and communities, 133 targets, or almost 80%, are linked to competences shared by the communities, the regions, and the federal authority. So based on this assessment of the Court of Audit in the SDG Preparedness Review of 2020, cooperation between all these entities is obvious. The United Nations Interagency and Expert Group on SDG Indicators has developed a global indicators framework to monitor the targets. It consists of 231 unique indicators that are linked to a specific target or to several targets. And these indicators, and I quote, should be disaggregated where relevant by income, sex, age, etc., in accordance with the fundamental principles of official statistics, and can be complemented by indicators at the other levels, which will be developed by the member states. The global framework of the United Nations is refined annually, and all methodological information, such as really important indicator fiches, are available in a metadata repository available on the internet. I will now try to explain you how this working group and the Federal Planning Bureau has used this framework in its work. So here you have the starting point. 231 indicators that come from the United Nations. The working group has approved 82 indicators, and they are presented by the Federal Planning Bureau on the website indicators.be. Of these 82 indicators, 43 indicators come from the SDG Global Indicators Framework. Remaining 39 indicators are specific for Belgium, but also often used and available at EUSTAT. And they were chosen by the working group as an appropriate way to monitor a related aspect of a target, take into account the national circumstances, more or less as a proxy. Obesity data to monitor a target regarding malnutrition is an example of this. The Federal Planning Bureau has used, of these 82 indicators, 51 indicators, or 3 indicators per SDG, to assess whether Belgium is on a path to achieve these SDGs. And again, 27 of them are listed in the UN list. 24 are specific for Belgium. Part 2 of my presentation will elaborate on this assessment further. The remaining indicators could be published in future under certain conditions, of course. But for others, the working group has chosen not to do so. And I give you here the details. For 34 indicators, data for Belgium are relatively easy available, and the methodology is really straightforward, so that it could be published relatively easy. An example of this is the death rate due to tuberculosis, HIV, and hepatitis. 31 indicators. For 31 indicators, there are data for Belgium available, but it's at the UN level in a lot of databases where Belgium is compared to other countries. And the working group needs to investigate these data further before publishing them, using them in our national monitoring. The proportion of adults with an account at a bank or other financial institution or with a mobile money service provider is an example of this type of indicator. For 80 indicators, the working group has concluded that more research is needed in order to find data in Belgium that fits the concepts used by the framework of the United Nations. An example of this is the pro-poor public social spending indicator. And finally, for 2 types of indicators, no action is needed according to the working group, because 35 of them actually have to do with policy monitoring at a global level and have no statistical nature by themselves. The proportion of certain states with voting rights in international organization is an example of this. And for age indicators, well, they are excluded for Belgium for quite evident reasons, because it makes no point. And for an example of this is the mountain green cover index for mountains in Belgium. Note that this slide also sheds a light on possible future developments, for it lists indicators of the framework that could, under certain conditions, be published. And also note that new indicators specific for Belgium, and preferably where relevant also disaggregated for the regions and other characteristics, could be envisaged. And certainly here, the view of specialists in the areas concerned and the practical feasibility of this enterprise should be considered here. The information of each indicator of all 82 indicators can be found on this website, which is operational since 2012 and which is managed by the Federal Planning Bureau. The indicators are classified per SDG. Here are some examples of SDG 1, 11, and 13. You can also consult a poster in the hall which sheds a light on the key features of this website. So you can get acquainted with the information available. On this website, there is an indicator fiche available with the classic elements of an indicator fiche, the description, the evolution, all the methodological information, the breakdowns, and of the 82 indicators, 43 indicators are broken down by region, including, where available, the confidence intervals of the latest year. Here you have an example of the information available on indicators.be concerning the risk of poverty and social exclusion. It gives a graph, and under there, an example of a table which can be used by the general public, basically. So, a second important product or output of the working group, besides listing all those indicators, is the statistical annex to the National Voluntary Review on the implementation of Agenda 2030, called Pathways to Sustainable Development. This document was approved in 2017 and presented by Belgium as a UN member state at the high-level political forum on sustainable development in July 2017. And it was a unique opportunity to present all the accomplishments of our country and challenges on the international scene. And indeed, the report explains for each one of the 17 SDGs how, in the context of a federal country, the various governments have organized themselves and are working individually and collectively to implement those SDGs. There is a statistical annex to this document with 34 indicators that monitor the progress of Belgium towards these SDGs. This annex, you got a snapshot here of an indicator of SDG 16, was prepared also by the working group, it is basically a shortened version of the indicators fiche available on indicators.be. Let me now intermediately conclude with some reflections on the future work of the working group. First of all, there is a societal debate on the Belgian SDG Global Indicators Framework in autumn 2020. With a key federal advisory councils. This is foreseen in the Federal Plan on Sustainable Development approved last year. And the objective is to consolidate the Belgian list. The plan states that consistency with indicators used to measure and to implement other plans is an important point. And the working group and also the federal administration will be involved in the preparation of this exercise. Note, of course, that the regions are represented in the working group in the Federal Institute. And it is furthermore the intention of the Federal Minister of Sustainable Development to do this in cooperation with the federated entities. Last Thursday, she has announced that the Interministerial Conference on Sustainable Development will take place the same day. This is indispensable for future international cooperation regarding SDGs, in view of an updated Belgian National Voluntary Review for 2023, announced by that same minister in her recent policy letter for the Federal Parliament. This concludes the first part of my presentation. My second part of my presentation is about statistics. It's about actual numbers. And I will not talk about policy processes. I will present you some results of the SDGs for Belgium. But let me first start with the problem we have, the challenge we face when doing so. Consider this simple statistic. In the beginning, it goes up, and at the end, well, there's some kind of stagnation. Okay. How to evaluate whether this indicator goes in the desired direction, knowing that theoretically, different directions are possible? Is the stagnation of the last year an announcement of further stagnation, or will it go down? Or should you consider the whole lot and say, well, it will gradually increase? This question is even more puzzling when a quantified target is agreed, here set approximately at the level 90. How can you say that this indicator will be able in future to reach the target? This is another question we have to deal with when assessing the attainment of these Sustainable Development Goals. And I will now try to explain how the Federal Planning Bureau has tried to deal with this in its assessment. Here is how it works. So you start off with the 17 SDGs, okay? You know them? And for the 17 SDGs, we've got 51 indicators, 3 per SDGs. And the 34 indicators of the National Voluntary Review of 2017 are on board here. For 26 of those indicators, there is a quantified objective. For 25, only a desired direction. Okay, for our analysis, we consider all available data since 2000. And this year was chosen as a starting point so that the length of the observation period would correspond to the period 2015-2030, which is basically the period to which the targets of the SDGs apply. It's called Agenda 2030. Okay, and now I would like you to invite to follow me. For 5 indicators, we used projections till 2030, realized at the Federal Planning Bureau, and those projections are based on hypotheses and developed by models. 4 of them relate to a target, a quantified objective. It is in the field of renewable energy, transports of goods, road and persons, and regarding greenhouse gas emissions. 1 projection regarding public debt is used to evaluate in the evaluation because this indicator has only the right desired direction. Okay. For 22 indicators, a trend is calculated using a Hodge-Prescott method appropriate for annual data. So basically, it boils down to drawing a line between a dot of observations, and this line should summarize perfectly, or in most appropriate way, the evolution of the indicator. Then the growth rate of the last calculated year of the trend is applied to the extrapolation period, gradually reducing it by 10% so that the extrapolation does not increase exponentially, and which is more realistic in the long run. And those 22, figures for 2030 are then matched to the quantified objective agreed. Yes. And then finally, for indicators with only a desired direction, could go up, down, the Spearman's rank correlation coefficient between the observations and the time trend is calculated, as it is done, by the way, by EUSTAT to evaluate sustainable development indicators in their report for the European Union. This information enables us to evaluate the attainment of the SDGs. For indicators with a quantified objective, a green light or favorable evolution appears when the given current trend reaches or approaches the numerical target. Regarding the latter point, I have to clarify that in order to take into account certain uncertainties in the projections and extrapolations, the indicators are also evaluated favorably when the projection or extrapolation is close to the numerical target for 2030. To determine this margin, the difference between 2015 and 2030 is calculated, and if the projection to 2030 shows that is less than 10% of the way still to go, then the evaluation is considered favorable. Basically, if it's really close, then it's okay. The same reasoning applies mutatis mutandis to an unfavorable evolution. When an indicator shows great variability, the calculated trend does not give a reliable information about the average evolution of this indicator. And then the evaluation is impossible. And this is the case for one indicator regarding victims of national disasters. For the 25 indicators where the direction is available, so the desired direction, you get a green light or a favorable evolution when the projections evolves in the desired direction, or the correlation is significant and the indicator evolves in the desired direction. Again, the same reasoning applies mutatis mutandis to an unfavorable evolution. The evolution is undetermined when the projection is stable or the correlation is not significant or not calculable. And what are the results then? Here are the results. You can say globally that 17 of the indicators, the evaluation is favorable. So it reaches its target or it goes in the desired direction. For 13 indicators, there's no conclusion, it is undetermined. And for 21, the evaluation is unfavorable. And given these global results, we have concluded that a trend break is needed to reach all SDGs by 2030. And this is then the answer to the question, is Belgium on a path to realize the SDGs by 2030? Of course, and this is the results, these results can be disaggregated on different ways. And here is one way to do it. Of the 17 positive evaluations, 11 have to do with environmental issues. So all these indicators are here classified in a certain theme, an aspect of development, a component, social, environmental, economic, and then governance. And of the 21 unfavorable evolutions, excuse me, yes, have to do with social aspects of development. 21 unfavorable evolutions, 12 of them have to do with social aspects of development. And here is an example of that. For the first indicator, premature death due to chronic diseases, well, it goes down, but not enough to reach the target indicated here by the light blue line. And the inactive population due to caring responsibilities goes up, but the desired direction should go down, so it gets a negative evaluation. Note that the first indicator would get a positive evaluation if only a desired direction, here a decrease, was pursued. But using a target here points out that that the evolution is not sufficient. This is the reason why we also have concluded that it is important not to limit oneself to a desired direction, but also to fix or decide on a target when evaluating the attainment of the SDGs. Here's an example of favorable evolution here in the context of environmental issues. The exposure to particular matter, well, the extrapolation shows that the target will be met in the future, here indicated by the light blue line, and the organic agricultural area goes up, which is positive because it's the direction where once it should go to. Finally, note that for the economic component and for governance, we basically have too few indicators to determine a global trend. Details of this assessment can be found on the two-pager, which was on the table here. This is a two-pager. Yes, and it basically summarizes the essential information for each indicator. Here you got a snapshot of, well, SDG on health, the 3 indicators considered, the component to which it belongs to, the objective, well, if it's a target, the figure, and then the desired direction, and then the assessment using the traffic lights symbol. Okay. Finally, I would like to mention complementary information to all this SDG indicators framework we have developed at the Federal Planning Bureau, and this in the spirit of Agenda 2030. I'm presenting here a composite indicator called Well-being Here and Now, and it synthesizes data regarding well-being and complements information given by the GDP. This indicator, this composite indicator, is composed of several indicators using different weighting factors. I will not go into the technical details here. They can be consulted on the website of the Federal Planning Bureau, but they measure different aspects of well-being, notably health, living standards, living in a society, work and education. And it appears that between 2005 and 2019, the well-being monitored by this indicator has gone down. The Federal Planning Bureau has published all this information in its report on sustainable development indicators, and the last one is of February this year. There you can find everything I've said about the assessment and also about the composite indicators we have worked complementary to this. This brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. My first conclusion is that I would like to stress that there has been a constructive cooperation and discussion between the partners regarding the SDG indicators list, with tangible results presented on indicators.be. Also, the foreseen societal debate on the indicators list should lead to a consolidation of the SDG I list for Belgium. And here, certainly the input of specialists and the regions are needed to go further. Secondly, assessment of the Federal Planning Bureau concludes that a trend break is needed to reach all SDGs by 2030. I've explained to you the methodology we have used, and certainly from a methodological point of view, this can be further debated. For EUSTAT, for example, uses another methodology. And this is okay. And I would like to announce that the 14th of June, the Federal Planning Bureau organizes a webinar where this methodology I've presented will be compared and presented And the OECD will do the same with its evaluation of the goal attainment of the SDGs. So save the date. And finally, and these will be my last words, in Belgium, there's further cooperation needed with the regions for this different reasons. You can learn from each other. And this cooperation is necessary and evident to monitor all the SDGs using official statistics. And of course, I have to say that this is indispensable information in our democratic society. I thank you for your attention.
Okay, many thanks, Jean-Maurice. I think we have 3 or 4 minutes for questions. Down there and here.
Thank you for your presentation. Just one question. You have presented like the assessment on the Belgium level, but I can imagine that some of those indicators will be in favor of the Belgian or the Flemish region or the Walloon region. Are there any plans to really look at all those different and the assessment of favorable and unfavorable at the regional level? If you've referred to the first presentation where you have those different regions in Spain, are there any plans to work together with the regions and to really regionalize all those indicators and to see where we are as Flanders or the Walloon part of the Brussels capital region, to see where we are at the SDG level?
Okay, first let me try to give, based on the information I have, the situation in those regions. So in the Walloon region, there is monitoring of the SDGs using their methodology, which uses some elements of I've presented here. And in Flanders, there's what we call Vizier 2030, which basically gives the objective of the Flanders regarding the SDGs. And there are different indicators that are coupled to these global objectives. As I've understood, Statistics Flanders has collaborated to this enterprise to find those indicators. To my knowledge, there is no concrete plan to do this, what you're suggesting, but I would like to draw your attention on the societal debate, which will be in the fall of this year. Maybe it's a moment where this can be discussed. And anyway, in June we will have a webinar where this our evaluation method will be compared to the one used by the OECD. This is what I know so far.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I had a bit the same question, but I took note this morning, Roland, that in the working group, you were discussing regional indicators for sustainable development goals, or maybe I didn't understand very well. I thought there were plans to do. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Yeah, I mean, I thought that the working group had been looking, or at least had a discussion about the possibility of looking at some of the indicators to bring them down to the regions.
These are two things. The question on the assessment is one thing, because there you say it goes in the desired direction or not. And this is also a question about which methodology you use. This is what Madam asked me. Regarding the breakdowns of the indicators in this set, regardless whether they are evaluated or not, that's another issue. 43, if I remember correctly, of the 82 are broken down by regions. And to my information, it is part of the normal work the working group that the working group does to find possibilities to make further breakdowns. But concrete plans on this, I do not have information about that. But of course, trying to break down all the information as far as possible, and where it is sensible, of course, into the different breakdowns. This is useful and also needed, and it is also asked by the United Nations. This would be my answer.
Okay, then I think that I want to congratulate all the presenters for very interesting presentations. I think we had quite an amount of interesting questions as well. And I think it's time to go to the reception now. Thanks very much for your attendance and see you out there.